When you say Hurricane Juan in Atlantic Canada, it will both incite waves of fear and also spark conversation, and both, normally, at the same time. Hi, I'm Chris May, host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast from the Weather Network in Canada. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. All right, here we go. The episode that so many have been waiting for and asking for because of its impact and its legend. This is the story of Hurricane Juan when it made landfall on this day in weather history. Juan was the 10th named storm of the 2003 Atlantic hurricane season and 6th hurricane. Have there been statistically worse hurricanes? Well, Hurricane Igor was, and you can find out why on This Day in Weather History, wherever you listen to your podcasts. What is also particularly telling about that is Juan is also the first hurricane name and one of two to be requested to be retired by the Meteorological Service of Canada. The only other one being, that's right, you guessed it, Hurricane Igor of 2010. For Juan, here's the sequence of events. September 24th. A new tropical disturbance formed southeast of Bermuda and continued to track across the subtropical Atlantic Ocean. September 27th. Traveling over the relatively mild waters of the Gulf Stream, the now named Hurricane Juan strengthens to a Category 2 on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale. Juan peaked its intensity with sustained winds of 105 miles per hour, or 165 kilometers per hour, but then, as it closes in on the much cooler waters of the Maritime coast, it weakens, losing some of its intensity. September 29th. 2003. This day in weather history. This is the day Juan makes landfall in Halifax as a Category 2 storm with winds whipping at 160 kilometers per hour. And it stayed that way from tail to tip of Nova Scotia, south to north, the entire stretch, and did not even really lose any momentum when it crossed the Northumberland Strait and rolled over Prince Edward Island, holding on as a Category 1 classified storm. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. But oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. And just to dovetail from that if I can, I'd like to remind you where you can catch this podcast if you might be picking this up off our site or from within a story. You can look up or ask for This Day in Weather History, wherever you normally listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Alexa, and now every day on yahoo.ca. As you would expect, the majority of the damage suffered was from the intense wind that buffeted the region. It claimed 8 lives. Juan leveled $300 million in Canadian dollar damage. That's $200 American dollars. And it was described as the worst storm to hit Halifax in 110 years. That's right, folks. You got to go back to 1893. Nobody was around to remember that one, and thankfully so. And it made that fateful landfall in Halifax on September 29th, 2003, this day in weather history. Hey, do you like the podcast? We'd love to hear from you. If you have an idea, go right now to wherever you're listening to me and rate us if you would, please. It's on a 5-star system, and we would love as many stars as you can afford. So rate us, but then also review us. This way we can always stay on top of how you'd like to see the show evolve. Then remember to subscribe to this podcast. Click the subscribe or follow button right there on the very same podcast homepage you're listening on. You'll be immediately reminded that the next day is ready to listen to, and you also have access to every episode in the archives. It dates back to June 1st of 2020, so there is a lot that we got to get caught up on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is September 30th, closing out another month of this podcast in its second year. During the night of September 28th through the 29th, it was back in 2016 when heavy rain came in and would not stop. This hit Windsor, Tecumseh, Leamington, Essex County, southwestern Ontario. This 24 hours of relentless rain resulted in significant flooding and a state of emergency that was declared and took effect on September 30th. It's on this day in weather history. Tomorrow with me, your host, Chris May.